Okay, so we are on chapter 2 of Vandevelde. We are just talking about what we learned this week, and we are going to. We didn't get a prompt, so we're going to go into it, but I just want to give a little disclaimer. So you're going to hear clicking because I'm a yapper and I don't stay on topic. So I have little things that I'm like scrolling through just so I stay on topic. They're like little topic points, just reminding me like this is what you have to get through. Please get through it. So don't mind that. I'm really sorry, guys, if that bothers you. Um, let's start. Statutory interpretation. So when a court looks at a law, like they aren't reading out of a dictionary, and so they're trying to identify two main things or two things, which are the plausibly applicable statutes and then the underlying policies within those. As Vandevelde notes, we have to analyze both the rule of the law, those literal statutes, and the reasoning behind that law. In the beginning of the course, our professor said you have to ask yourself why until you can't ask yourself why anymore. So here you might be asking yourself, why does this law exist in the first place? The next thing I wanted to touch on was just Vandevelde. He kind of gives us a hierarchy of where to look. So I don't know if you've ever heard the legal term roadmap. That's kind of what this is like. So first, he says you start with that statute itself. Many statutes include specific section outlines, so the policies, the legislative findings, etc. We look for what those statutes explicitly say. And when you do that, you're looking towards the language. So when you look towards the language of the law, you're asking yourself, is it clear? Is it plain? Is it unambiguous? If it is, then the job's normally done. You don't need to dive into that history because the text doesn't leave that room for doubt or confusion. This is that plain meaning approach. So let's give an example. So you're in a park, you see a sign. You walk up to that sign says, no vehicles in the park. Now, you don't need a history lesson to know that your car is not allowed in that park. The sign clearly states what it wanted, the message it wanted to get across, that no vehicles were allowed in that park. That's kind of the point here. And now you're probably asking yourself, maybe you are, I don't know, what happens when the language is broad or muddy? That's where you move into that step 2, that legislative history. This is where you look at that mischief or the specific nature of that problem that existed before the law was written. By examining those circumstances prior to the enactment, I had to think about that for a second. By examining the circumstances prior to that enactment, we can kind of see what a legislature was trying to cure or fix. Because laws are often drafted in these general, in a general language, sometimes it can cover more ground than it intended to. So understanding that mischief helps you narrow down your focus, or helps us narrow down our focus. The last thing I wanted to touch on was in class, our professor had said stuff about aliens and stuff about blue shirts and how these laws were this and that. And we all know, a court's job is to apply the law, okay? They're not to rewrite it. We've been taught this for a very long time now. But they can modify it or limit its interpretation if it leads to those absurd results, which is what he was getting at. So I just wanted to add that in here. That absurd result is met when it clearly contradicts the legislative intent. And so that was just something I wanted to add. Hopefully that helped. The last thing I wanted to do was go into the components of the case. I know we did in class, but I just want to touch on them, maybe add a few things in there. My time might go over, I'm sorry. But let's get into it. So 1 was the facts. I'm not going to add anything here. There's no need to. 2 was the procedural history. The only thing I'm going to add in here was that this was important for the president in stare decisis because it allows us to know their decision, which is the standard of review. And I just wanted to define that standard of review. It determines what the appellate court must decide and its effect on future cases. So I just wanted to define that. 3 was the questions presented, just the issues on appeal. 4, the rules of the law. The only thing here I would say is a certain set of circumstances is certain rights or duties, makes certain rights or duties exist. 5, the application of law to fact. The only thing I wanted to touch on here is the different facts. So we have dispositive facts and sufficient facts. Dispositive can also be necessary facts. They're the same thing. So necessary facts are where the court relied on them in deciding whether the elements of the rule were satisfied. And then sufficient facts, so their presence establishes the element, but they do not need to be present for it to be satisfied. But if they are present, then it is satisfied. The holding, I just want to make that distinction from obiter dictum or dictum, which is non-binding. That just means like a word said in passing. I'm not going to go into why it's important, but we're going to move to 7 now, the disposition, affirm, reverse, or remand. There's a lot more on that, but I'm not going to get into it. And then 8, the dissent and concurrences, which we all know what they are. We've all read cases before, so I'm not going to get into that either. But hopefully this video helped you a little bit. And that's all I have today, so bye!